Well, good evening, everyone. This is the regular meeting of the Burnsville City Council for work session on Tuesday, September 9th. It is 6:30, and I'll call our work session to order. Our work sessions, for those who are watching and those in the audience, are informal. We go directly to our agenda, and the first item on our agenda is the architectural review option. Jenny Faulkner, our Community Development Director, is presenting. Ms. Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm just going to run through a brief PowerPoint presentation here summarizing what was in the background. If I could have the control room put the PowerPoint up on the screen, that would be helpful. Thank you. This is stemming from, oops, here we go. From the all-day work session that was, I think, last February now, and so there was discussion about the HOC DRC, and a decision was made to dissolve that group, but yet there was further discussion that was asked for regarding options for architectural review of projects in the city. Okay. There we go. So before we get into options, I just want to run through what our current process is. We have the zoning ordinance that has the standards for what the architectural material should be in every zoning district, and we have design guidelines that guide development in the heart of the city, what those expectations are. We also have our gateway design guidelines that are also adopted in the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan. We have a policy that has established our development review process, and those are for items that need a land use clearance. And the Planning Commission is the body that is set forth by statute to review all zoning and comprehensive plan matters, and therefore they are responsible for that. And then, of course, the City Council adopts or approves any land use clearance applications after they are heard by the Planning Commission. We have our current land use process. We try to bundle things and get them through the process from application before you within a 60-day process. That's just something of note that Burnsville is strive very hard to do. So as we talk about changes to that, that's why we included what the effects to our timeline would be in the background. So when there's two different processes that we have here. We've got things that need a land use clearance that come before you, and then we have things that are just permitted uses that are more administrative. So we've thrown out some options. We were asked to kind of get creative here and think of what we could to help inform your discussion. So we came up with a handful here on those that would go to the Planning Commission and then come before you at your regular meeting. We could have a separate architectural review committee. This would be similar to maybe our HOC design review committee where there was a separate stop in the process. There are some benefits to that as we outlined in the background, and that would add probably about 3 to 4 weeks to the process. And it's not that we need 3 to 4 weeks to review, it's scheduling and getting revised plans in and getting the timeliness of that worked out.
Do you see that as a benefit or a hindrance?
That's a hindrance, but yeah. The benefits are, as you've asked, there would be a separate review that takes place with a separate group of people. We could have a separate review panel, which could be more administrative. So not necessarily a committee, but it could be made up of staff and maybe 1 or 2 members of the Planning Commission. So it becomes more administrative, but that those a Planning Commission member or 2 is representing the Planning Commission from an architectural standpoint. That would add less time to it because we could more easily incorporate that into our 60-day process, but it would extend it because there would be time, again, to schedule that meeting and if revisions to the plans are needed. We could bring items before you for sketch plan. The good thing is the developer knows what's expected. You're able to communicate that to them. That's going to add a lot more time to the process because you know your sketch plans come before you at work sessions, which are once a month, and some agendas are full, some are not. So that could add 4 to 12 weeks or more work sessions for you to review those. We could have a process where you as the council sees more of the application prior to it going to Planning Commission. Of course, there's a transition and due process that gets affected with that. But the benefit is we could fold that into our current review schedule fairly easily. We could have the Planning Commission do more architectural review. As part of their regular meeting, we could have them focus on that or ask that specific question in our backgrounds and in our presentations, specifically to the Planning Commission. What do you like about the architectural review? What do you not like about that? And the chair could facilitate that, or staff could as well. And then we could perhaps alter the membership of the Planning Commission. If you think we need to have an architect on the Planning Commission, sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't, or a landscape architect or a designer, we could have a specific category for that. Historically, it's been open-ended, depending on who the council feels best fulfills that role at that given time with the makeup of who's ever on the commission at the time. So those are just a handful of a full gamut of options. We did a survey of our market cities, and we included that in the background. Most cities operate, I think they all did actually, how Burnsville does, where it's a staff review and then it goes to the Planning Commission and then it goes to the council. Outside of a Heritage Preservation Commission in areas that have older downtowns, that is the standard of review in our market area. When it comes to permitted uses, right now those are currently just reviewed by staff. Do they meet the ordinance? Do they not? If it's a straight up permitted use, and then they apply for a building permit. We could have a separate process for an architectural review committee. Again, that would extend our permit review time. Right now, we're out about 2 weeks for commercial reviews, and if there's changes that are needed, we try to, after those are submitted, we try to get those out in a week. So we do try to review things as quickly as we can. As far as permitted uses, we could also bring those to you to sketch plan. That is going, there's a lot that we do that doesn't always come before you. I want you to know that. So if you want to see more of these things, to be able to weigh in on them, whether it be through committee, separate commission, or yourselves, there's a lot of work that would have to be done with that. We could change the ordinance, and if there's something specific that the council is interested in, if there's a need that's not being met or an expectation on recent projects, it would be good to talk about that, because if there's something in the ordinance that you think is lacking, the ordinance is the key to getting meeting the expectation for the city to get what it wants in these developments. So we could keep the process the same, but look at changing the ordinance to address what those deficiencies or concerns are. That helps the developer know what those expectations are. If we don't want vinyl on townhomes, we can put that in the ordinance. But the process is then clear, and then that keeps us business friendly by putting out what our expectations are. Not that we have low standards, but that we're easy to work with because we let it be known what those requirements are. We can make no changes. We do have a very good process right now. We have a good rapport with our developers. I don't know when the last time was I got a complaint, or you did, about from a developer about our process. We're meeting our market expectations, and we do have a reputation for being business friendly and expeditious in how we bundle our applications, what our expectations are of our businesses. We do a lot of repeat business with contractors and with architects on plans. And so one thing that the staff has, Deb and our other planner, Chris, and I, have, as we talked about this, we certainly can talk about architectural aspects of projects with the Planning Commission kind of at their year-end review. When we talk to them about their work plan for the upcoming year, we can also talk to them about what did you like last year, what didn't you like, what did you wish you could have done that you could. We can have a more specific dialogue in this regard with the Planning Commission that we haven't specifically had in the past. So we're going to do that regardless, just to make sure we get that input. We consulted the city attorney as we start to talk about this. There's some legal implications in zoning and in enforcement. So some of the considerations as you talk about this is that our standards of review have to be consistent and clear. That helps our process just be very transparent. Anybody who does a review on our architectural standards regarding our ordinance, that they're adequately trained, they're competent, and that they add value to the process. Think about any resources that may be needed and scheduling impacts. We've tried to lay those out for you. And the ordinance is the means to get very specific outcomes that we want. So versus an unpredictable process where somebody has to go back and forth 2 or 3 times to try to satisfy that commission or the board or a subjective review. So those are just some things to consider. And with that, we just pose the questions. If you feel additional architectural review is necessary, which option is preferred? And if you think ordinance amendments are needed, let us know what types of changes you think are needed, and we can get back to you on how to address those.
Okay. Bill?
Well, at this stage, I don't feel any changes are necessary, but I'd like, with the mayor's permission, to call the head of the Planning Commission up to see if
Well, all of them can come.
Yes. If they have
We
any
have full
comments.
Planning Commission members, and they can introduce themselves. So pull your chairs all up. There's a couple of chairs over here, and then we can all, yeah. And so for our listening audience, if you can introduce yourself so everybody, yeah. And I think we can have this kind of discussion, but before I get to them, I'd like to hear from the members of the City Council. So let's go to our Planning Commission and for introductions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council members, for involving us in this discussion. The Planning Commission has not discussed this. We saw the agenda. We talked to ourselves, and we felt it was important for us to be here and to listen to the discussion. We will, however, I can speak for the Commission that whatever the direction of the Council is, we will do the calls, we will follow through and do our best, as we always do.
And it's Commissioner Ram Singh.
Ram Singh, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Jim Bradrick.
Yes.
Ben Tahiri.
And thank you very much, and thank you for joining us. I think one of the things when I recalled our discussion in January or February, and it is about the dissolution of the HOC, and we saw some value from what they did. And that was specifically because there was some architectural review, and it was a special district. So through our discussion, we said, how can we incorporate that particular function? Do we need a different group, or can the Planning Commission? And that's what the discussion is tonight. And as I listened to Jenny's presentation and read and have thought about it and talked to other developers, both commercial and residential, about the process. All of them said expediting the process is of great value because it is money. And if I look back to when I came into office, one of the things is that we did things by piecemeal. If there was going to be an ordinance change, you had to hear the ordinance change. Then you had the comprehensive amendment. And then you came back, and then you had the new ordinance, and then you had the concept plan, and you had the development plan approval. And then you had the contract. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of things, and we got everything to where they're bundled now, and the process is at 60 days, and that they can do that. So I think the question before us is the value. Can we see the Planning Commission not only do the technical review, but also do the architectural piece for this? And I'm seeing that we're going to, one of the agenda items is the comprehensive plan and the visioning process. If we need to do any architectural elements to be incorporated, that can be done at that time, because that'll address ordinance and codes when we do that work. So, but for this, you're asking, do we need another set of eyes, or do we just have the Planning Commission execute that function, both the technical review by statute and then the review on the architectural elements that's already in ordinance right now? So, Mary, because you were a planning commissioner. And
I was a planning commissioner, but I was a planning commissioner at a time when we had two architects on the commission.
It's been hard to get an architect.
Yeah, it is. So thanks for being here, Ben. But and I'm one who really was pushing for something along this line, and I was driven by not only what you said, but the fact that we have these people who have this quality or this talent and had this interest in looking at the HOC, which has very rigid standards. But I think we were also, because of some projects that had come before us, concerned that there were some things that were just not terribly attractive. Mm-hmm. And I know, Madam Mayor, you really jawboned those issues into something that came out to be a better product, and I'm not sure that should land on you or any other council member. So I see a need for something. I know you talked about the fact that we are very expeditious in this community for business applications and even for residential. And you said it means money. Well, you know what? Money isn't everything here.
Yeah.
You can have a really schlocky project that goes through in 60 days.
Yeah.
So something that in your report or your background that really caught my eye was Al Brixius's comments at the end. And he said, I have a number of cities, I have a number of the cities that have adopted architectural guidelines. My current clients rely on city staff or consultants to conduct the review against the guidelines and identify compliance or deficiencies. I think that there should be some kind of guidelines out there. How we go through this, I don't know. And maybe the planning commissioners, after we get around the room, we have some thoughts on that.
No.
But I think we need some guidelines. It's really loosey-goosey, and I don't.
And I agree with you, because that's why the Heart of the City was successful, is because of those architectural
They're very
guidelines.
attractive.
And so we need that. But the thing is, who is to do the review of
I
that?
agree.
And that's where I see the Planning Commission can do
Well,
both.
and I don't know.
But we have to do the heavy work of putting those guidelines in place.
But I don't know if Mr. Brixius was asked of how his client cities do this.
Oh, but we know how that was done with the Heart of the City.
I understand, but, and also going back to the market cities, it's clear they're thinking about this. There are some hints in there that they're thinking about this. So I guess I'd like to know what Mr. Brixius is thinking. You know, what do his clients do? Now, we talked about market cities, but, you know, I guess I'd like to look beyond our market.
Yeah. You know, I talked with Colleen Carey, and I think, Jenny, you know Colleen Carey. She's one of the developers here in our metro area, very successful. She says, put those guidelines and standards, architectural standards, and she says, set the bar high. Set the bar high. Because she says you want good product, good architectural product in the city. And I agree with that. I agree that we need good architectural product in the city.
It's a very subjective statement.
It is subjective. No, I also,
No, but but the thing is, if we put guidelines in place, we've got good people with good architectural background that helped us put
well,
those.
we have
in
a
place.
consultant who's already doing this. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I also would like to point out that the last time that when the Development Review Committee process was put in place in 1991,
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
time to at least look at this again.
Yeah. Bill.
So to me, it is subjective. I'm not an architect, and maybe I'm not a good visual person. But what I worry, you know, again, for the over 3 years I've been on the city council, I've sort of felt our process has worked. Yes, sometimes it's landed in your lap, Mayor, to make some suggestions, and Council Member Sherry as well, to make some suggestions, and I think they've been good. But when staff makes presentations to us, by the time it gets to us, it seems to me about 95% of the issues are solved.
Well, that's okay.
Once in a while, they'll say, yes, we had to have some discussions with the developer to solve the problem. So it's only the more rare, occasional problem that gets to us. And I just, you know, again, I'm not an expert in, you know, I don't know what guidelines and stuff look like, but it just worries me that it's another level. And unless our planning commission tells us otherwise, that they don't feel, it's not whether or not they'd accept any responsibility, but if they believe that this is within their wheelhouse, their ability based on what they do, then, you know, putting it in their lap first with the staff and seeing how that works without any changes would be still at this stage where I'd be.
Okay, Dan, and then I'll go to Suzanne.
Did we have a architectural member of our Heart of the City review? Was the makeup of the board
Yep.
one architect?
Yeah.
Yes, she was a planning commission, and it was Cheryl Lockett,
Well, and after Cheryl, we had another.
another one. Yeah, but Cheryl was the
remember his
first
name right now.
one
Yeah.
during the Heart of the City. She was in that steering committee that worked with, and we
That's
always
okay.
had a
I just
group.
want to know if there was an
Yeah.
architect.
Yeah.
So my point is, we actively sought an architect to fill a specific role on the Heart of the City Design Review, because minus that architect, we would not have had a design review committee consistent with our.
No, we had a design framework that was put in place. That's why we were successful.
Doesn't matter. We could do that here too.
Yeah.
But my point is, did we have
An
and did we
architect.
seek out an architect to fill a position of an architect on that Heart of the City Design Review?
Did you want to say something about that?
During the process, we did advertise for that position as an architectural member. Yes.
Have we ever done that with our planning commission?
Not for the planning
Probably
commission.
not, because we never required it.
Well, we didn't require it, and the other is that not too many architects apply, so what do we do?
Because we don't advertise for one. The planning commission has never once, unless we had it as a requirement, put out that we are looking to fill an architect a position on that planning commission. So here's my point. I did a little bit of searching around last night, and I just did another search on Google for planning commission requirements for architect, and Waukesha, Wisconsin came up, which I think is where my wife is from. Sorry, honey, if I got the wrong city, but their planning commission has a architect position on it. So I'm in agreement with, I don't want to add any layers that causes delay. Absolutely, positively can't do that. Another step in the process. But I think the one suggestion that staff has made about making our planning commission have a specific position that does require an architect degree or whatever you want to call it, education, is the right way to go, especially if we're going to ask them to sort of take on a little bit of this role. None of us are architects. None of us have ever, and our city council doesn't require an architect's background to get elected, yet we are making those types of decisions. I don't want us to do it. I'd rather the planning commission have a position. Currently, we have one with Ben Tahari, but when his commission is up, who is going to replace him? People that we have apply and that we interview and we like and we fill it. I suggest that we make the change to make that position on our planning commission officially a single person. We always have to have one architect on the planning commission. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be a common model throughout the country. There's a lot of cities where, in Waukesha, actually, is the mayor, is part of the planning commission, and the parks, head of the parks is also, but there's there's an architect that's on that planning commission, and it makes sense. That's where you want to have it. And I think maybe this is something that we're just finding that we had missing all this time, and I'm glad we're having this discussion.
And I think it's the appropriate thing to do, but the other thing is that we have to have guidelines for them to make that decision against. So it's
I don't
another
disagree with that. I mean, I don't want to get too. I don't want to get overly prescriptive on exactly what we're looking for, because as we all know from our experience, it evolves and changes, and so when it's screwed down a little too tight, then everything has to require a variance, and that's setting an applicant through a process.
But there are ways to write that, and there are things. I'm going to go to Suzanne first before I get back to you, because she's been waiting to speak.
Well, that's okay. I agree with what everyone's been saying, of course, not delaying the process. I'd like to hear what the Planning Commission has to say, because I do think that they are the ones that would make sense to do this work. And I agree with you, Dan, that having an architect, I mean, that would take care of the expertise piece.
Yeah, so that opinion is always at the table for the others to learn from and share. Right.
And of course, though, I'm sure the Planning Commission would appreciate having some guidelines of some sort, because it is a very subjective. But I would think 9 times out of 10, it's probably not an issue, but you're always going to have that one case that comes up that needs that scrutiny. And so I would like to see something in place that would address that.
Now I'll go to the Planning Commission. Jenny?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I was just going to ask or add a comment about the guidelines. We have guidelines right now for variance criteria. We could come up with something similar to that. I mean, most of the rules are in the ordinance, so maybe where the ordinance is vague, we could come up with guidelines, for instance, for compatibility. What does that mean? Because that's in there. So we can take the existing language and make it almost like an addendum like we do for the variance criteria. And then that is specifically called out in the background, not just what they're building, but how it complies with the guidelines. And then it's also an opportunity for the Planning Commission to have a discussion about that, just so that's specific, so that's not overlooked.
Okay, thank you. Bill, did you want to comment, or can I go over to the Planning Commission?
Please go.
Thank you, Madam
Ram.
Mayor and City Council members. Just speaking for myself, as I said earlier, we did not discuss it, so I cannot speak to the Commission.
Yeah, don't
Speaking
worry
for
about
myself.
that.
I think the Planning Commission, we're lucky. We do have an architect as a commissioner right now, so we can take on the task. The guidelines would be very, very helpful.
Yes.
We can save a lot of time if we have guidelines. If you don't have the guidelines, we don't know where we are going.
it's subjective
and we waste
again.
a lot of time. But I feel that the Planning Commission right now is capable of handling this because we have an architect on board. And, we have done a good job so far. There are times when we had to make recommendations to City Council. None of us have the technical qualifications to deal with it, but we put our heads together and we do make recommendations, and 99.9% of the times the City Council accept those.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know if other members, other commissioners would like to say.
Anybody have any other thoughts that you want to add on? Ben?
Madam Mayor, thank you, councils. It's a very interesting idea. Frankly, based on my experience, I have presented projects in front of planning commissions for many different cities. And for every different cities, I've had different experience. Sometimes planning commissions get heavily involved with architectural design and express their personal opinions of this neighborhood has such and such an type building. We like to stick with it. I personally haven't seen written guidelines that they had to comply or we had to comply. It was merely opinions and ideas. Guidelines are an excellent idea. I think the challenge is the developing this guideline. What basis we have to decide what basis we're going to develop this guideline, whether we stick with the ordinance or we put the ordinance away completely and go completely different direction toward architectural design, standard, experience, materials. I'm sure my other commissioner colleague agree with me, or if please let me know. Developing guidelines is the biggest challenge.
Yeah,
So
and
we
I think
don't
there's
step-
some models across the
Right.
country, because I've looked, and there are some models
Right.
across the country that already are there that we can use as models.
And my other question is, once we develop a committee to review design, at what level, what authority the committee have, whether they
No,
have
it'll be
authority
the
to
Planning
approval?
Commission. We're talking about the Planning Commission having that responsibility as well. Not just the technical review, but also the architectural review.
That's basically what I had. There were many projects that we, with my colleagues, we went through, and I personally had to hold my opinion back because the project meet the ordinance. And expressing architectural opinion and ideas may conflict or may not play a big role
Sure.
to approve or not approve a project based on a council review.
Steve, did you have anything to add before I go to Mary?
Yeah, I do. I might actually talk a little bit here. My experience, Madam Mayor, members of the council, my experience has been actually before this board back in the late 80s in a number of the other cities. So I've experienced the earlier stages of this when things did not run smooth. And quite honestly, the way it's running right now works very well.
Yeah.
And I agree that it would be it would be a step backward to try and slow the process down too much. With that being said, I think that there's two elements here. One of them, we're creating a built environment that's going to last for a long time. Most of this stuff is longer than us. And it came to us even at our last meeting where we were looking at a building that's been here for over 50 years and they're remodeling it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is part of what has to factor into this. I'm taking a little different tact on this because, to me, the building code and the zoning code are both a minimum standard.
That's right.
And because of that, where do we get from the people coming into town something more than just minimum?
Yeah.
And I think
That's what Colleen Terry was getting at.
Right, and I think that's truly where the task comes from for us. There's a city in Indiana called Columbus, and it's the hometown of Cummins Diesel. And they have, Cummins Diesel basically funds the architectural fee for any project that comes into town where they agree to certain standards. That's the benefit to the developer in that case. They get the architectural fee for free.
They knew exactly what,
With that being said, I think that there may be another way here too, where if somebody comes in with a project that exceeds standards, and because of that there are variances or deviations that are allowed that are built into a design guideline that staff can manage as well, and then see how it works. I mean, quite honestly, the whole issue of the guideline is part of it, but I think there has to be something where the value is to the person coming in for them to do a little more than what's minimum.
Yeah,
And
exactly. That's what Colleen Terry was getting at.
the only other point I'd like to make is that, and I only say this because I chose not to become a registered architect, but there are many design professionals out there. Currently we have myself, I'm a residential designer, he's an architect, we also have an engineer on the planning commission. Quite honestly, if we can encourage that, I think we're all going to be in a better place because, as noted, we get 2 terms, and that's it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, thank you. You made the point where some of the folks that I had talked to, they says, you're going to look at your built environment long term. So if you have to have a vision, set your standards high because you want a product that's going to be sustainable and look good for your community and its image. And there's a lot of models out there for all of that. Mary?
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I think that you're helping us, at least me, get to what I think is the solution here, and that is to improve the basic standards and the requirements. But I also wanted to address what Ben said, because I understand what you're saying, Ben. When I served on the commission with the 2 architects, sorry about that, they were always reluctant that they might not like a design, in terms of taste, and this comes into this problem of subjectivity. So I think what we have to figure out is some good guidelines, better material requirements, not just the minimum. And I think we're on our way. I mean, I really do. And then I really do want to see, as you said, hey, you have an engineer. Again, I had that luxury of serving with engineers, both mechanical and then a traffic engineer at one point. They bring a lot of value. So it's not only your training that you bring, but just that understanding of the work. I'd like to see this added. I think that I'd like to see it added to the Planning Commission. How we figure that out as far as, whether we want a licensed architect or design professional in some way, how we do that, I don't know, but I'd like to see that addressed.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a consensus about, let's make sure that when we advertise for planning commissioners, that if there's a position that's open on the Planning Commission for an architect, or someone who has the background of an architect, but is not a licensed architect because you take a different direction. And but you have all of the yes. And then we need guidelines. We need to make sure we have those guidelines, but get someone on the Planning Commission that has that background. I'm going to go to Bill and then Dan.
I'd go as far to say a presumption, a priority given to that position, because of course we could get applications that don't fit that, and then we have a missing spot.
Sure.
But secondly, and again, I appreciate all the input of people that are greater experts than me, but I'd have to see what this looks like. I'm not sold, on the idea. I just, and I may be wrong, but for my over 3 years, I just haven't sensed that there was a big problem by the time it got to us, and the few times it came up, right or wrong, or fair or unfair, I watched a couple of my colleagues get that solved, and we moved on. So that's all I'm saying. So.
Okay. Dan?
I'm sorry, your name?
Steve.
Steve. Well, Commissioner, I was going for last name. Steve, first name, work session here.
Yeah, works.
Mr. Steve Benji.
I just want to go back to your comments. It sounded to me like you cited Columbus, Indiana as having an incentive provided by Cummins when an applicant exceeded the design standards.
It was it's sort of the other way around. If you come in and choose an architect, they were nationally, and now they're actually using locals as well. They basically funded it for you. It's a little different than what we're talking about here, but I think the end result was the same. They end up with a city that has, it's essentially, it's a field trip for an architectural school, which is how I got there. And you walk around and you see buildings done by people who are, in Europe and just everywhere, that the things that you see in the magazines you're seeing all in one place here. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what we're after here either, but it raised the bar of what the product was. And, not all of them are 100% successful. I mean, some people might look at that one and say, whoops, that one probably shouldn't have done that. But nonetheless, it drives the rest of the city up as well, because there's a pride to it.
So did Cummins pay for all architectural fees?
For the projects that we were shown, that's what I understood. They covered the fees for those architects.
Just for those architects. So they were basically saying, regardless of what the criteria was, if you choose this pool of architects to do your project, we'll pay your fee. And those, I would assume, the incentive is those pool of architects were providing a really high-quality product.
Absolutely.
Thus, the applicant might spend a little bit more on materials and construction to meet that architectural drawing standards. Right. And so, really, in a way, it was a side door incentive to essentially upgrade what they were going to do, what they might have done if they hadn't gone with one of those. The reason I brought that up is we've talked now and then about some sort of incentive for applicants to remodel when it comes to residential stuff, and unfortunately the permit to do so isn't a big incentive based on the cost of remodeling a house or doing a new roof or siding or that kind of stuff. So what incentives do we have in place now for someone to come in and actually exceed the standards that we have on the books today, whether today or even after they're revised?
Well, I think that's part of what we need to do is we have to look at all of that. Right now, we're talking about who should do this function, and then now when we understand that that function is going to be performed by the Planning Commission, then the thing is we have to look at the guidelines, architectural guidelines, and then we can say, what kind of economic tools then do we put in place? But we can't do all of that, and we've got this other big stuff that we need to do. Jenny.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, what we're talking about here, we kind of already have in place, and that's our PUD. And our PUD is all about benefits and deviations. What additional above and beyond the ordinance does the city get in exchange for the deviations that a developer may be asking for? So we already have the tool in place. I think we can incorporate some more specific guidelines to kind of be more specific with the developer. If you do this, then this. Or we can maybe pull back a little bit on how we have been giving deviations and expect more from a developer. So if you want a deviation to parking, maybe your building should look better. We can put that kind of information in the guidelines, like a weighted scale, again, I think might be.
And we have that when we look at TIF.
Absolutely.
We have all of that also in place.
Madam Mayor, thank you, council members. Excuse me. I think once in a while, I think we can't add to the process. I think we're pretty well known for getting it through pretty quickly, and I think we can add to that. I think we need to give them the answers to the test. If we raise the bar, whatever that bar may be, we give them those answers, because I respectfully disagree that an applicant can't get to the Planning Commission and have one of us go, we want a 6 foot taller parapet wall, where that is the first time they may or may not have known that was a requirement. I don't believe that's fair to the applicant. I think they've got to know coming into it what's in the code, what we've expected, with some. Then when we take the PUD and we play with it, I think some examples of we made a small change to the renovation of the old Best Buy building. It was against code, I think, Deborah, and I believed what they were asking for was appropriate, and we took that and I think we ran with it. We made some changes to Pawnworks with some of the front, so I believe there's got to be some expectation on our part about what we can do appropriately, and we have to give them the answers to the test and not extend the process.
No.
We may raise the bar by what we're going to do in the way of codes, and then give the Planning Commission through a PUD process, maybe we're going to pull back on some parking spaces or something because they spent some money on this, or whatever the good is. And I think that's needs to be one of our goals.
Yeah, and that can be all part of the guidelines when we put it into place. So as I'm listening to everybody, we do have consensus. Change the process where we require an architect if that role isn't filled, and then secondly, put some guidelines in place, and that function is going to be executed by the Planning Commission, both technical and architectural review. Correct?
And if we're going to spend some time on this, let's review the incentives that we have in place for developers to exceed the expectations.
Yeah. And that can all be cleared on the PUD as well. Okay. So that's good?
Office Depot.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I just
Yes.
want to thank the Planning Commission
Yes.
for coming tonight.
Are you going to
Really
stick around for the next one?
There's some interest.
Yes, and I thought you might all be interested in the next one as well. So the next one is the comprehensive plan check and the Thrive 2040 comments. So that's where we're also looking at our comprehensive plan that will be coming up here. Okay. And Jenny, you are also presenting this item along with Deb Garros, who is one of our city planners. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. As you know, Deb is our in-house resident comprehensive plan expert at the city, so she was deeply engaged when we went through this last time and will be going forward. So, exactly. So what we've done in the background, and we'll just kind of go through this and highlight where we're at and where we're going, and then go through some of the policy plans that we're currently reviewing from the Met Council. The Met Council adopted their Thrive 2040 plan this last May. We had submitted some comments to that. I'll go through that in a little bit. They also have out for comment their housing policy plan right now and their transportation policy plan, and they have other policy plans that are coming. All of this is leading up to system statements, which are statutory requirements that are put upon cities. We have to meet those system statements in our comprehensive plan. They will review our comprehensive plan for consistency, not only with the system statements, but with all those documents that lead up to that. And our comp plans are due in 2018, and we expect those system statements to come out the end of next year. So as you all know, we are tuned in very much now to what's going on because we know where this is going. So looking back at our last process, we undertook a community-wide visioning exercise back in 2006 that engaged, I think it was a little over 120 people, citizens that were at the table, business owners and residents. And then using that visioning exercise, that laid the foundation work for our comprehensive plan for 2030. What did we want to look like? The new plan.
And that just goes back, Jenny, that built on Partnerships for Tomorrow.
Correct.
Because we still used all of the themes in all of that.
Exactly. So when we prepared the 2030 plan, we had a 21-person advisory panel that was selected by the council. It took about a little over a year, for the Planning Commission to lead us through that process. The Met Council and the City Council adopted it then in 2010, and there have been 2 amendments since then. So what I'm trying to get at here is this is a lengthy process, and I included this in the background. You may remember that for those of you that were here. And we basically wrote a new plan. So we're here to check in with you. This is starting to ramp up. How do we want to go forward and do our plan for 2040? What we're thinking, and we did meet with John Shardlow last month. He is our historic city planner for Burnsville. He used to work here, I think, when he was in his 20s, and now he's decades older, and he's been our consultant since then. So he's well versed on the history of Burnsville and planning. So Deb and I met with him to get some ideas. How can we best go forward, best use our resources that we have? It's expensive to do a comp plan update. I think we spent well into the 6 figures last time doing this, and so it will be expensive going forward. So how can we be efficient and make the best use of our resources? With that said, we're looking at maybe just doing an update, because we just did this back in 2010, and we had a recession. And so when we did our plan in 2030, we planned for a full build-out of the city. We're still planning for a full build-out, and our pace at which we thought would be there has slowed tremendously, as you know, from the recession. So not much has changed there. We won't have any new census data to incorporate. We just did that. So by the time our plans are due in 2018, the new census won't be out. So that's not going to change. So what we're thinking of, and after consulting with John, the plan for us could be, we're going to begin work in late 2015, as I've talked to you a couple meetings ago about updating the MRQ plan and maybe some economic development strategies. We know we want to do that. We'll look at our budget. We'll start to budget for the comp plan in 2016. Once we know what these system statements are, we'll know how much consultant work we are going to need. We don't have the staff resources to do this, no doubt. And then we're planning to maybe spend a year to go through an update, not a rewrite. The plan we have is excellent. It's very good. It's used by example from people all over the metro. So we have a solid foundation. It's just how can we update it without having a full reiteration. So kind of here's just a very rough outline with we're early into this, so there's a lot of room for changes, but what we're thinking of is we'll have a diverse review panel, maybe that doesn't have to be 21 people, but interested stakeholders in the community. And of course, I met a lot of interesting people on Night to Unite. I think next year when we go out for Night to Unite would be a good time to get some people who wouldn't otherwise be that we're familiar with or be part of our circles to engage, but people who care about what happens in Burnsville. So there's different resources, I think, that we can pull from if we plan early. With this panel, we'll go through the history of Burnsville and our planning. We have a strong history in Burnsville of how we've planned our community for the last 50 years. It was intentional. We can do a critical assessment of our existing chapters, what's old, what needs to be updated. There's indicators. We have a lot more data today than we even had 5 years ago. We can track the change in property values, and you've seen some of this information, our code enforcement data, our rental license data. So how can we use that data to shape any changes going forward? So we'll even have a lot more data when 2016 rolls around. What does the Thrive 2040 mean to Burnsville? There's a lot of implications in there. We need to make sure, of course, that we cover that. How do the ends and outcomes fit into this? Those are the goals that are set by the council. We'll want to roll that into there. With this panel, we'll want to brainstorm what the current and future issues are. The current issues will guide what the goals will be. So what are the issues? How do we address them? And those become the goals. Right now, we know we've got the MRQ. We know some things are changing there, and we'll have some answers to that in the coming years. TOD is transit-oriented development. We've got the Orange Line coming to Burnsville. What does that mean? We need to address that. Our economic development strategies, how can we keep improving the tax base in Burnsville? What does that look like? We're no longer developing, we're redeveloping, so we need to maybe focus on that. And the distressed properties, the economic obsolete properties and distressed properties. So that's what we know today. There may be more that will come from this group. And then articulate those changes or new issues into new goals. That's our rough outline. So before I get into all the comments on these other policy plans, because there's a lot of meat to that, I think Deb and I would just like to know if you're okay with our plan to proceed to update the plan instead of do a brand new plan.
Oh, yeah.
Council, I just think we have a great history when you look at everything that's been done from Partnerships Tomorrow in the 90s, 2010, the update of the plan, and what we are, there's no reason to redo that. We have things that we have to revision, like our industrial area and those distressed properties. But otherwise, the MRQ and what we want our city to look like 20, 30 years from now is really what we need to focus on. But I don't see, we have a good comprehensive plan. And the 2010 plan that we just had adopted, that we worked on in 2006, that was done very well. I mean, because we had over 1,000 people in the 90s, and then you had over 100 people who added their input, and I think we have a great plan in place. Anybody else think that we have to do a rewrite? We don't have to do a rewrite.
Okay. We wanted to check in with you because this is what we were thinking, but we need to make sure we literally are all on the same
page. So happy that you're at that meeting with John Shardlow, because, I mean, Howard Dahlgren wrote the first comp plan for this city in the 60s when we were incorporated. And as you said, Jenny, it was very intentional.
Very intentional.
Everything about Burnsville. And we built through all of that document throughout. Yeah. So it's very good.
Okay, we will continue. The next thing you'll see on that is probably when we do the budget then next year, we'll start to get some numbers put in place for planning for 2016 then.
Good. The only thing that I want to see when we do this, and you're looking at distressed properties and the economic development piece, is the architectural standards and any of the incentives on the economic development side. And we already have a lot of great models there from our TIF plan and the goals and objectives that they have to meet and how they get those incentives. Great.
Okay, I'm going to move into the Thrive plan and just kind of let you know where we're at. Mr. Albrecht could not be here tonight, so I'm going to try to cover his, mine, Deb's, Heather's, and Dana, we've all been actively engaged in this. We want to make sure you know kind of where the staff is at. So for the planning commissioners that are here, the Met Council adopted their overall, they're the regional planning agency. For the metro area, they've adopted their Thrive 2040 plan. And as I've stated, they have policy plans that come from that. And now we are to review and comment on that, which is going to shape what Burnsville's plan has to be. So we submitted a letter, I want to say it was back in February, and they revised their plan somewhat, as did, I think they got several hundred comments on that. And so they have basically addressed most of our concerns, or they've been better addressed. So the main thing here is the population projections for Burnsville were much higher than we thought. Remember, we did the 2030 comp plan, anticipated 100% build out. They were projecting to add, I want to think it was almost 10,000 more people than that. Yeah. Well, so we were able to work with them on the numbers and get it back into the range for 2030. So that's good. The tools and resources, and the lack thereof, have now been recognized. We all know tools are limited, and the expectations on cities to do more with less is much more, or that reality of less resources is now implicit in their plan. They still don't include much on the market. The market has a lot to do with how we develop, and so their plan, and I'm sure you've heard this is not the first time, but anyways, their Thrive 2040 and their subsequent policy plans really are lacking on where the market is going. They do have clear language on directives, technical assistance, and expected roles. There was some ambiguity in that, so that's good. They also, on equity and climate impacts, have clear objectives and roles, too. It was very vague before. Now we kind of know more of what it is. I'm not saying we like it, but we at least have an idea of what it is. There is emphasis on preservation of existing housing stock. That's a good thing for Burnsville. We have a lot of good housing stock here, a lot of affordable housing stock. So that helps us, and they've recognized that. And flexibility for local needs and land use. So those are the gist of our comments, and that they have acknowledged and recognized most of those.
Excuse me, Mayor. Jenny, on the background that you gave us, I don't think you have it on here, or if you do, I missed it. You did have a line here that really caught my eye, and that is, Thrive 2040 better addresses Burnsville's need to have a balanced riverfront and not just industrial, because that is what that council believes is appropriate. Could you explain that?
Yes. In their Thrive plan, and this is coming through in their transportation plan, they are putting much more value on freight movement and on the riverfront. So rivers they see as a resource for moving freight to help with transportation.
Part of the
Along with that, they want to preserve and enhance industrial uses that are along those riverfronts that can access the river and the railroads. Our vision for our riverfront is green space, less
and
industrial.
we don't have the ports. The ports are in Savage.
So,
well, we have the salt.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's just.
But I think our long-term plan may not have that being there forever.
Yeah.
I think, is my understanding from previous councils and our current plan is that we are a river community, but nobody knows it. You cross the river to get here. Burnsville is on the river. How do we get the public down to the river? It's an underutilized amenity.
Yep.
And so by having it guided parks, that's where Burnsville is at. The Met Council's vision is that maybe we have more industrial land on there. So we commented on that because it was inconsistent. They have generalities. We need some flexibility to meet our needs here locally. So they have modified their language.
Mary, they did not read our comp plan in the 90s that reflects that that's going to be an amenity.
But
the
city will prevail.
Yeah.
They've
it's in our comp plan. It was adopted.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's correct.
From the Partnerships for Tomorrow, that comp plan was adopted by the Met Council, recognizing that all of the amenities along the riverfront were part of our plan.
Okay.
And our comments are to
So I just
preserve.
I wanted to understand that we
That's what that
prevail
is.
on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what that is.
Thank you.
This council might not like it, but previous councils adopted it, and for us, it is an adopted document. Our plan that was part of the 1990s plan that we
But that calls
included.
for the
Amenities along the riverfront.
yeah. Yep. Okay.
So the Met Council adopted that Thrive plan, and now they have these policy plans that are out for comment. The transportation policy plan, I think it's over 500 pages if you've looked at it, and so we're still working our way through this. But we just wanted to touch base with you on where we're at. I think I put in my PowerPoint here 4 or 5 major talking points. The first thing is their transportation policy plan is focusing on transit and not highway investments. That is a priority for them. That has major implications for the suburbs and for Burnsville. As you know, our suburban transportation relies on roads. 84% of trips in the metro area are by auto, 3% transit, and you can see the numbers there. But the focus for them and their funding is all on transit, so it's not getting to where the users are today. Funds derived from suburban areas are going to be shifted elsewhere. That is a major concern or overriding initiative in their policy. They talk about growth at the edges, and this even comes through in their housing policy plan. That's what the HPP is. The edges have the most opportunity, yet they're left out of the transportation solution and the housing solution. So if the opportunities are there, they are focusing, again, their initiatives on what their goals are, which are towards more of the developed communities. Along with that, 73% of the population and household growth and 59% of that employment growth is on the edge. Again, the dollars aren't lining up. And there's little highway investment in those areas. They don't look at the cost effectiveness. What is the most, if we've got limited resources, what is the most cost effective model to provide the transportation needs in the future? And they're not addressing that. Again, they're sticking to just the transit. We have a concern, cities in general, how the equity will be used in transportation funding. So the Transportation Advisory Board has recently raised this issue going forward. This will affect all of us, and what is the Met Council's intent on funding allocations and equity? It's just an unknown.
Yeah, and, you know, I sit on LUAC, and I've pushed back on this because one of the things is that I have asked is that you're focused only in transit and the metro areas where the largest GDP is produced, and roads are not addressed, and yet we have roads that need to be maintained and also reconstructed. And I ask if they've talked to Commissioner Zelli and MnDOT, because they're the ones who have control of roads. If all of their policies are all going to be focused only on transit and not have a conversation with MnDOT, how do we really have a complete transportation plan in place and how we move goods and services?
Madam Mayor, and in the suburbs, our transit, for the most part, is road reliant.
Yes.
So if their focus is on transit, they cannot, well, they are, but they should be including the roads as part of it, because that's how our buses get around, is on the roads. And if we don't fund the roads, we don't have adequate transit, or it's inadequate. So a couple other of the highlights. You can imagine our comments will be several pages long here, but the transit-oriented development, so we have the Orange Line that is planned down 35W. The current terminus is at the Burnsville Transit Station. And long-term, the terminus will be in Lakeville, and then will be another stop at the Burnsville Center on 42. So they have very specific design standards in their TOD plan, which is, this is a policy document, but yet they have very specific design standards, almost as if it's a zoning ordinance or an implementation guideline as opposed to a policy. So there's a little bit of concern about what is mandated and what is a guideline here. So they're focusing on high-density housing and mixed use at these TOD areas, which is within a half mile of the transit stop.
Jenny, one thing, everybody, you all sit on a committee, whether it's on LMC or Metro Cities. We have to all push this thing where they're getting into our business, which is land use and zoning. And the TPP and HPP, huh?
Are you surprised?
No, but boy, we have to really be vigilant.
So their TOD's design is focused on high-density housing and mixed use. This is what they're going to be asking of us at our Orange Line stops, just so that you're prepared that this is coming. Their design, yet they picked the locations in Burnsville not because of the housing that's around it, but because we have a 1,200 stall parking ramp right there, and because we have a regional shopping center. Now the expectation is that we have mixed use, and so they're trying to fit an urban model or a different type of model at the suburban transit locations that may not be ideal. Another part of that is there's, of course, an affordable housing component that's expected to be a part of that, and there's pressure for us to do inclusionary housing. Inclusionary housing is when we require a developer to put in affordable housing units and to make those units forever be affordable. The statute allows for us to do that if we want to. Of course, Burnsville has not, but there is pressure for us to do that to meet the goals of the Met Council.
Yeah, Mary?
Cabrini Green lives.
So our comments, I can't speak to that, but if I could just.
Letters, I'll get calls for that comment, but.
Do we get credit for all the affordable apartments that we offer already?
We do. I'll get to that in the housing plan. This is just the transportation part of it and the transit stops. Local decision-making is left out of that, so what Burnsville thinks we should have at our transit station, it's not left up to you to decide. The Met Council is telling us what they want these to be. So the land use specifics seem overreaching. They're not policy. And also there's a question that we're going to raise with them is inline station. If the Burnsville Transit Station terminus is temporary at the transit station, our goal, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we want inline stations. And if that's going to be on 13, then that should be where our TOD area is. And how does that look like? So we need to make sure, and we're talking 2040, so that is our plan. By 2040, they will be in line. What does that look like? And so we will ask them at council to work with us, or that would be our expectation, that we have inline stations at both locations in Burnsville by 2040. And then the future plan is based on today's model, today's driving standards, and they kind of alter it a little bit, but they don't really explore what 2040 looks like. You know, as you think about this, this is 24 years in the future, 2040. 24 years ago, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have cars that can park themselves. I mean, technology has changed so much the last 24 years. How is that going to change going forward, and how is that going to affect transportation patterns? And so they are very short-sighted in that. So I think I've covered all of our concerns in a nutshell there. Are there any questions on that?
No, I was glad that our comments will address the whole land use issue with all of that. Mary?
I just want to add one thing you had in the background, Jenny, that I think was very important here, and that is that this does not mention cost effectiveness. Right. There's absolutely no consideration for cost effectiveness.
Correct.
Not only that, but then local control.
Yeah.
None.
Right.
Yes, Deb?
One of the major shifts that my council is doing as well is they want to leverage affordable housing and livable communities, which is an optional
That's right. And
element.
It is not.
Yeah.
It is
It's not
nice, but it's not required.
But to be eligible for their transportation funding and transit funding, you would have to, as a community, participate in that program. So it's really tying livable communities to transportation in a way that has never been done before. In the past.
Yes,
Correct.
and livable communities, if you look at that act, does not have a requirement for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Mary?
that brings up a sore point with me. Another one. That is that I really wonder what livable communities is doing for us or can do for us in the future. Really, why bother? I mean,
It
I
just
think
gives us the opportunity if there is grant funding.
But we've
But we don't
applied, and we never make the cut because our affordable housing is not counted.
I don't know, was that the reason why we didn't get the money this last time around?
This last time our project did not have an affordable housing component. That was a big
But
part
the
of it.
thing is, we already have that component.
Of course
because
we do.
According to, this is an existing project that we're still working on, and we already satisfied that.
Exactly.
We satisfied that component, and that was my gripe.
But
So the thing is, we have to continue to make that clear.
we
No,
make
well,
it
the
clear.
thing is,
I mean,
the people who are, and I talked
So
to
why-
some of the people who are there, who are in that committee.
but why be part of it? I mean, I'd just as soon say bye-bye. I mean, we're not getting anything. We're not getting any benefit from
It doesn't cost us anything to be in it, is what.
Really?
No.
Well, we're just
But it makes a statement if we withdraw.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Bill.
I'd like you, for the sake of the public, to understand the kind of push and power this non-elected body, the Metro Council, is trying to get away with. So would you state it again about how they're going to control funding and what they sort of propose to do with it? I'm on the Metropolitan Minnesota Valley Transit Authority representing Burnsville, and when the Met Council comes and gives a presentation, their presentation is this is now what we're looking at, this is what we're going to do, and this is how things are going to be. So I think this is very important for our public to understand what one of the things that the Metro Council's up to, and would you say it again about the carrot and stick and funding as part of this non-elected group of people?
Funding we don't get anyway.
Between the transportation policy plan and the housing policy plan, this time around is the first time that they are really connecting the two, and they are focused on establishing a new way to come up with housing performance scores for communities, which won't be determined by the time this is adopted. And then number 2, using the Livable Communities program, which is an optional or voluntary
That's
program
right.
for communities. But in
I
order to
worked
be
on that.
eligible for their transit and transportation funding, a community would have to participate with
There are no
Livable Communities.
penalties. They say they have to, and my pushback to them is that the Act does not, it statutorily does not require that. Does not require that.
That is what's being proposed in these plans.
Well, before this is all done with, I think there will be a lot of cities pushing back on that piece.
But how can we push back if we say we're going to be part of it?
Well, push back because they're not right and not making that requirement, so that the act as adopted by the legislature back in
95.
Yeah, 1995. I was a rookie. Yeah. I remember that. So it was 1995. And I tell you what, that was never the intent, and it has survived all of this. And now this Thrive 40 is trying to do away with that. And I'm telling you, a lot of cities are pushing back on that particular requirement because the statute does not require that, and there is no penalty. Yes.
Madam Mayor, they are already tying their transit priorities to livable communities right now. The last grant round, another city in Dakota County made an application for a CDA project for LCDA dollars, and they got by, I think it was by 1 point, and their whole project is affordable housing. And you think they would have scored 100%, but they didn't, because there's other criteria that are attached to these funds now that weren't before.
Mary?
Which leads me to think the only ones who are going to get these funds are Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul.
Yeah.
So I go back to my question, why are we playing nice? Why are we playing this game?
Because where they get their money is that it's the money that we all pay into it, Mary.
We don't get any back.
I'm still trying to make sure that we get some. If they're taking our property tax dollars, they get it out of our property.
Anyway.
And I want that money back.
Well,
that's how we got $4 million.
They don't give it back. As
Yeah.
you said in that last application, we met the affordable housing component.
We did meet the
And they
affordable. We had
didn't even know our name. So my point is, why do we pretend that we are going to get something ever? And we say, oh, you're nice, this Livable Communities program is so wonderful, it's so wonderful.
You know what? Here's the thing.
It's not.
We can always opt out, and when they
I
change
vote we
and they're
opt
better, then we can opt back in. Because there's no reason for
I
us.
want to opt out.
Because we can opt in and opt out at any time. According to the Act, if I remember it correctly, you can opt in or opt out at any time. And there's no penalty. I think the Act is that clear. Right, Jenny?
I concur. We have right now we're committed for 10 years, but we can change that, I believe, at any time.
Yeah. Bill?
Well, again, what's even more disconcerting, and I didn't know this, I certainly knew about the affordable housing piece, but Jenny just told us that they added a whole bunch more criteria for the carrot and the stick. And this is, it's becoming ridiculous. It's becoming ridiculous.
And the thing is, because we had opted in for 10 years and they changed the criteria on us, we can opt out and say that is not what we agreed to.
I think that would make a statement.
Yeah.
And I would like to make
Yeah,
that
and then we can always opt in. Heather?
Madam Mayor, I'm hearing a general consensus for that, but I think what I might suggest is that we
find out
what exactly the process is, let you know what that is, and then bring forward something that would allow.
And then we can have that other. But the thing is, I think this is a good direction because our staff can say to them at council, when we agreed to 10 years, here were the agreement and the guidelines. Now you're changing all of that on us. We would like to opt out because that's not,
They keep moving the goalposts.
And the thing is, that is not the true intent of the statute.
It's dishonest.
Yeah. So, Okay, so there's.
Did I read that correctly? I'm seeing nods. So,
Yes, to go ahead and do the work that you need to do and then come back. But let them know our displeasure over this.
Okay.
Okay. I'll move on to the housing policy plan now.
Yeah. It's just only going to just make it even more.
It's not going to get any
It's
better.
not going to get any better.
Now on to the bad.
Yeah, so the thing is, yeah, they're going to try and tell us how to do land use on our residential zoning now.
It is good to be engaged because this will affect us, so whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so just want to highlight again 5 kind of overviewing things that we came through on the housing policy plan.
Yeah.
There's a lot of assumptions in the plan, and it doesn't get to how the need was determined. And they do recognize the need and the number of units that are needed are going to exceed the resources. But what they don't touch on is how do we reduce the need then? We get that this is a housing policy plan, but what else can we do? And they're also getting into an economic development and having an economic development plan. And this is where they can help address the need to reduce the need for affordable housing by spurring economic development. So that's kind of one of our comments. Their housing policy plan does not include the number of affordable housing units that will be expected on each city. This is making it challenging for us and other cities to comment, because how can you comment on a policy document when you don't know what the outcomes are? What is the effect of their policy on us? We don't really know. What we do know they did put in the plan is that, same as last time, lower wage jobs are going to affect the number of expected units. We have a regional shopping center, which equates to lower wage jobs in the mind of the Met Council, which means we're going to need more affordable housing units. You'll remember this discussion from last time. The TOD is going to increase the need. If we have transit, we're expected to have more affordable housing units. What will decrease it for us somewhat is our existing affordable units will get a credit. But we don't know how all those numbers are going to shake out. But that is some of the methodology without any more detail than that. That's what the plan is indicating. Whoops. Okay. So the other 3 points, which are kind of intense here, but they have a housing performance score that's going to apply to everybody. But before it was, if you were livable communities, you have a housing performance score, and then that's used for funding. They're going to have a housing performance score for everybody. The methodology needs to be more clear. Again, how are they getting to this score? They need to have an appeal process. What if we disagree with the score? Because it is going to affect transportation funding. So we need an appeals process. On transit-oriented development, as we've talked about already, it's more than policy. Now, this is their housing plan, and it's kind of, this area is in both plans. They want high density. They want more affordable housing units. They're proposing an urban model on us. And they're looking at mixed projects, one building that would have a mix of incomes in it versus a mix of neighborhoods. So we're going to be commenting on it. A neighborhood like Heart of the City has been very successful, where you've got affordable housing buildings or the townhomes or apartment buildings, and you've got higher incomes, as opposed to having them all in one building, which they say is certainly a challenge. So they need to recognize mixed neighborhoods.
That's an understatement.
There's also pressure for cities to utilize other tools. They've referenced CDBG, which we have very little control over changing. We have a plan that we submit to HUD through the CDA that says what we're going to use these dollars for. We can't just up and change it in the middle of the night, so we're committed to that. They want us to work more with homeowners associations. We have no control over homeowners associations.
None.
Inclusionary housing, we talked about that already. Livable communities funds, they want us to, they're tying those to more things, as Deb had said, and they're also talking about SAC credits for affordable housing. There's concern about that because there is an expense to be paid when a housing unit is brought on the grid. So if that goes away, who's going to pay for that? What is the impact of that? Somebody pays, it's just who. So that's another comment that staff is going to be presenting in our letter.
Mary?
Oh, well, would you put that one back?
Oh.
That back?
You're going to want to go back on his
I just want to point out here something that we've mentioned earlier.
And so our residents understand CDBG is Community Development Block Grant.
Yes.
HOA is Home Owners Association, which are privately owned.
Right.
They're not
And
not
CDBG
city.
is federal.
Federal.
Contract.
And Livable Communities is a state.
Yeah, and homeowners association
Yeah.
is your Burnhamwood homeowners,
Yeah.
your
And that's
Walden
private.
homeowners, yeah.
All of that is
But
private.
I think another thing that I want
sewer.
to point out here is something you said earlier, and that is, do you see the word market on there anywhere?
No.
No.
Yeah.
They totally ignore the effect of the market. This is government planning,
Dictate.
overreach, dictation, whatever you want to call it, at its finest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well said.
You go, girl. Okay, Jenny.
I didn't put that in the PowerPoint, but certainly in our comments.
Take Mary to your meeting with Ms. Council.
She is.
Be there in
She
time.
is.
Yeah.
We're each other's co-pilots at the meeting, so. But what's interesting about the market, if I can just, because I was at a meeting today with a developing suburb on this, how the market's affecting their affordable housing is the big national developers are coming in and buying up hundreds of acres at a time.
Yeah.
There is no opportunity for an affordable housing developer to pick up a 5-acre piece, a 10-acre piece, because
Or
of
22-acre
the market.
piece.
Yet the expectation from the Met Council is that the city shall do something and make this happen, but they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, or the ability, they don't even have the opportunity to do that. So it's a challenge for suburbs when there's an example of how the market is lacking. So that was my last slide on this. There's a lot here, and
And I
that's where
think
we're
we
at with
discussed and had questions, and I think you have direction already. Is there anything outstanding that you did not get direction from?
No, we're good. There's more plans coming. The water plan is coming next. I think
Yeah.
we've heard bits and pieces of that. And then the parks plan, which we're hoping will be less controversial than these three, but you never know.
I think.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jenny and Deb. And anybody else had any questions for them? But we're going to stay on top of this, Jim.
I have just a clarifying question. Thank you. So help me and maybe the audience understand this real quickly. When you talk about opting out, you're talking about opting out of just the
Livable
2040
Communities, the
2040
Livable Communities
Okay.
program.
And because we can't opt out of the Met Council's
No.
ability to
Sadly,
manage,
no.
well, opt out in general, or opt out in how the Met Council
Yeah, and
manages our
see,
sewer
even
system.
opting out, they're still going to hold us to their plan. The only thing by opting out is that we won't have the opportunity to get dollars. Okay. Yeah.
And could that be as deep as the orange line? They go, we're going to skip you, and we're going to put the
Well,
next transit hub
that's
in
where
Lakeville.
staff is going to do before we come back and have a resolution that we opt out, because those are the details that we have to understand on the orange line and anything else of that sort. So there's still a lot more details that need to be understood if we opt out. What is the impact of
Just
that?
trying to get some understanding.
No, but that's a good
standpoint.
question. That is a good question. It's a detail.
Well,
Mary
I
and then
guess when
Bill.
I'm saying opting out, because I've heard you said
Mm-hmm.
that the suburbs are just wild about this.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, hey, let Burnsville be a leader. Let us be the first to say, we're not going to play your game. So that's what my intent for opting out is, and maybe we'll get other suburbs to get behind us on
Yeah,
this.
and we'll find out more about what that means with regard to transit and all of that, how that funding is. It's only around the livable communities, but the transportation plan and the housing plan is broader than the livable communities program. So that's where a lot more detail, and that's why Heather is saying, let us do more work, because some of those things are not all clear. Well, the transportation plan itself is 500 pages. The housing plan is even more, or is it about the same amount? I mean,
might be a little bit
I
less.
just, in just pulling all of that stuff, I sometimes think, somebody else.
So
Yeah, it's a lot
little
of
over
reading.
100 pages.
How
for
much?
Housing policy.
400?
100.
Oh, really?
So
Only
it's just a quick
100?
read.
But it's incomplete.
Oh, it's incomplete.
That's part of the challenge.
Yeah, okay. And then there's a water plan. and all of those others.
It's not like we can opt out of the taxes they take from us for just that section.
No, no. It's the implications of what, because the transportation plan and the housing plan, they're still going to impact us. We're just opting out of the livable, thinking of opting out of the livable communities. We need more information to understand what that's going to do for us. Okay. You have everything, Heather?
We have everything.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. And thank you, Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll go to our legislative agenda, and Heather, you and Dana have this one.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we, as you know, last year was the first year that we tried to group some of our, the whole list of your legislative agenda to do some priorities. We felt that was very helpful in focusing the efforts of staff on the policy priorities that you have. One of them, I'm going to ask Dana to do a very quick overview of sort of the key highlights of what happened in the last session, to just provide a little bit of context, and then we'll walk through. I'm not going to read the entire 7 pages to you, but really walk through some of the changes, and it's available online too, so the public can see it. So we'll go through that relatively quickly. But before we do that, I just wanted Ms. Hardy to just give us a real quick 3-minute highlights.
Okay.
Did you? Oh, I'm sorry. That's you.
Okay, thank you. Dana.
Thank you. The 2-minute highlights on this, the second half of the biennium, this session, 2014, was coined an unsession, meaning that Governor Dayton wanted to clean up a lot of obsolete language. They did that by cleaning up over 1,000 incomprehensible laws. Historically, the even-numbered years of the session are non-budget capital years, but we did enter the session with a $1.2 billion surplus. So there were tax cuts that were handed down or passed almost immediately in the session. A total of 2,843 bills were introduced this past session. 169 were sent to the governor's office, and all but one were signed into law. Here at the city of Burnsville, we tracked over 164 of those introduced bills. Some of the notable outcomes during the session, the ones that passed: minimum wage increase, clarification on the sales tax exemption for cities, homestead credit refund and renter property tax refund increase, anti-bullying, and medical marijuana program. Some of the things that were not passed this session: Sunday liquor sales, a major transportation bill, traffic safety cameras for local law enforcement use for regulating traffic at intersections, and a repeal of the residential sprinkler mandate. Other notable outcomes, LGA, which is local government aid, that appropriation increased by $10.1 million for the 2015 distribution. The city of Burnsville will receive $101,721 for this distribution. Some other notable changes, the levy certification date was changed from the 15th to the 30th, giving us more time to bring more accurate data to council and for reporting. Contract and bidding, establishing minimum criteria went into effect, and then there were some changes as regards to how cities handle the individual data that we collect and who has access to that. Let's see. I think those, well, in para, there was an omnibus pension bill that was signed into law that increased the employer-employee contributions by a quarter, and then for each of the employee and the employer beginning in 2015, and doing an automated adjustment when it hit a certain threshold on an ongoing basis. And Heather, I'll hand it over to you to go through some of the specifics.
Any questions on the high-level summary?
Nope.
I think. Then I'm going to just jump right into the legislative priorities. One of the things.
Yeah.
Good question.
Bill?
Estimated increase on para, is that?
It was 0.25%. When there's a certain funding in current law, when the funding reaches a certain level, when it's below a certain level, there's an automatic increase to the contributions on the employee and the employer share that kicks into place.
And how will that affect us overall?
That'll be an increase in the budget. That's one of the pressures that we would have included. We can certainly pull that out and get an estimate for that amount.
Going to continue going forward? Just a quick question in general.
Generally, I don't think so. The market seems to be turning around, but I mean, it tends to go with the market, and so we can see if Para has any additional information on their website where they're doing projecting different future increases, but. With that, you all established 5 legislative priorities. One of them actually passed last year, the warehousing tax repeal. So now you have 4 priorities. You can continue with 4 priorities, or one of the things we're recommending to you is that if you want to have a 5th priority, we've made some recommendations. So I'm going to walk through the priority list. The number 1 priority, we've only made some tweaks to, and this is on the property maintenance code enforcement effort. We wanted to really make it clear that our fire and property maintenance folks work together on the building code as well as the fire code. And so you'll see, and then it also clarifies what we have responsibility for. There are certain things like mold and other environmental health issues that the state is actually responsible for. And so this position does some clarification in that regard.
And the other thing about this one is that now MLC and other cities see the value and are going to help us with this.
Yeah, I think Ms. Faulkner can attest to that. I think that we've gotten a lot of questions on how it's going, and they have really seen that we've made some improvements.
Ann Lancheski likes this. Remember Heather when she was at our meeting? And so the other MLC cities that are not charter cities are saying that we can use this too. So it's not just Dakota County going after this. So.
Yeah, and this is specifically we'd like to continue to look at getting clarifying the authority in statute for us to be able to assess for those code violations unpaid administrative fees and reinspection fees. The next one is the Preserving the Host Community Economic Development Grant Program. We just made technical corrections here just because it's no longer the 2013 session, and we just want to continue to support the preservation of that program, which we've used some of those grant funds in the heart of the city, as well as for a study on the Cliff Interchange. And I'm going to keep buzzing along unless people have questions. The 3rd priority is close the freeway landfill. What we wanted to do in this, we've been working very diligently on a proper closure of the freeway landfill to further the council's goals of having redevelopment in that area. We wanted to add a specific reference to the use of the new market tax credit program. That's currently a federal program, which hasn't been put in the state, but if there is if they start to consider that, which we have some indication that they will, we think this is an excellent candidate for that type of program. That area is already in the federal new market tax credit eligibility zone. And so we think that this would just be a tremendous example of a success story for using that kind of a program.
Also likes this new market tax.
Yeah, they didn't include it in their legislative agenda last year, but we're hopeful that maybe they will again. So, or maybe they will this year. The 4th priority is the residential care facilities. This really talks about clustering. We want the similar authority to non-concentration standards that cities of the first class have. That we haven't recommended any changes to that to you all. And as I mentioned, the 5th one is done, the warehousing tax repeal. And so what we've recommended is we moved one from the supporting position statement regarding metropolitan governance. There seemed to be quite a lot of energy in the council in their conversations related to metropolitan governance. So this is the one that we've put, if that's...
Yeah, there's a consensus, Bill. Let's go for it. Do you not want this one to be out of her?
I propose to move 5 to switch 4 and 5. That I think the Metro Council matter is so out of control that I would actually propose just.
Well, all 5 will be working.
I know. I'm just saying in terms of priority that I would switch 4 and 5 this year. That's just that's how strong I feel about it. So.
I think we're all going to be working on them. It's not that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's just get it.
but we do say it's a number one priority or number two priority. So whatever we do imply, so whatever the council's pleasure is on this.
Yeah. You wanted to go to a 4 position?
Yeah, I would move it higher than that.
Oh, there's some, I think we need to do the maintenance and, yeah. These are things that we can have control over. We need other people to hop on board with us on this one.
For the same reason, it's more making a statement. They're all the same priorities.
Yeah.
It's making a statement as to which one's at the top of our list.
And to me, that's why it's just more making a statement, because I know that it's more likely that 4 is doable.
So you say go to 4, because the 1, 2, and 3 are really, really.
Right, I'm only proposing to switch 4 and 5.
Everybody, you want to go 4 and 5? It doesn't. That's fine. Okay.
All right, I think we have our top 5. Then we'll move into the supporting position statements. The first, development and redevelopment, there's a couple of different themes. There was a lot of legislation, or it felt like there was a lot of legislation this past session, where there were funds that were proposed for certain purposes that then seem to get diverted for other purposes. And just really from a transparency standpoint, we think that this council strives to be very transparent, and so you'll see that we've kind of shored up some of the language, and in one instance we made a specific position on that too, to help with that. In this particular piece, the development and redevelopment in terms of some of the programs, with just very quickly, the Metropolitan's Livable Community Program, when we think that there should be some standards to ensure that communities, that there's an equitable distribution of funds. They have guidelines with how much should go to central cities versus suburbs. We believe they should follow those guidelines. And that's the clarification, and we think that that's what we've heard from you.
Yep.
And then you can see some other ones about some specific examples regarding new market tax credit in this old shop. We also added, and I don't want to miss this because this is important, the city also supports extension of TIF districts when economic conditions have slowed development. We're looking at TIF 7, potentially if there's an opportunity to extend that. We just wanted to make sure that you all wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The next, number 2, is actually moved from monitoring. It says new. It was actually not new. It was moved from the monitoring, so I apologize for that. And one of the things that we've seen is some specifics, and you heard Ms. Faulkner talk about it, about different elimination of the city's authority in the areas of local zoning. There have been some conversations about urban agriculture districts and some specific zoning requirements for cities. And so we felt that there were enough proposals that we wanted to move that up into the supporting statements from where it was before, which is monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
The next couple are not new. The daycare facilities and licensing, to allow to have some licensing with respect to daycare as a home occupation residential districts, and so we want to continue to support that. Levy limits, this continues to oppose. The city has had long-standing agenda, has had opposition to levy limits in terms of limiting local control. Mm-hmm. Transportation, as you might recall from our discussion last year, we split it out. There's a couple different transportation ones. These two, transit is the only one that you had in the supporting position versus some of the other pieces that are monitoring, and we'll get to that soon. The creating and implementing of local partnerships, we struck some of the language about enabling the legislation for municipal administrative legal processes. We put that further up. We figured it was a little bit duplicative from the first priority. But one of the things that we want to do is look at the clarification of the sales tax language for partnerships, things like the DCC and LOGIS. There were also some proposals to put some additional restrictions on those kinds of partnerships that would require them to follow certain rules that could potentially limit the efficiencies of those partnerships. And so we wanted to clarify that for you all as well. If people are comfortable with that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Cable service providers, this is not a change from cable. This is stating the city's position that cable franchising remain at the local level. The next one is data retention for local law enforcement. There was some legislative action on that, which passed in 2014 to increase the time to 90 days. We can work with that passage of the legislation as long as it doesn't go below that. So that just reflects that piece. The next piece is the number 9, support for local services. This is maintaining or increasing the current level of support for mandated local services from the state. This is the transparency issue that I talked about before. One example is there the state collects specific fees for the fire safety account that helps fund the state fire marshal's office and things that they do in terms of regional response teams. So helping cities train together. And what has been done is they continue to collect the fee, but every year it's kind of a fight to go and get the money dedicated to that purpose, even though that's the purported intent for the money. And so this is a transparency issue that we added, but this is new.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
they're operating it as a profit center?
No. It's just that it's this is one of those areas that it's ensuring that if you're raising fees for a particular purpose, that at the state level that goes to that particular purpose. It goes to fund training grants and things.
But they're not diverting some of those funds to other uses, or do we know that?
It has been proposed almost every year. It has not yet been enacted where it is.
Funds go.
Yeah. They are.
That's what I mean about profit center.
Right. Well, they do at some point. I mean, we're worried that we don't want them to direct it to the general fund.
That's what I'm saying.
So, as you can see there. So.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is another new position, and this is alignment of responsibilities with federal agencies and expertise. There's a couple different areas where this, I think we talked about with the Corps of Engineers, when the Corps of Engineers told us that they were going to really expand the length of times that it would take for them to approve permits. We suggested to the federal officials that this might be an area where DNR does a really good job of plan review. Perhaps they should delegate that authority. Another example is the fire marshal must be, right now they work on the fire code, but then they have to have that adopted by labor and industry. And what happens when it goes to labor and industry is a significant delay in the amount of time that it takes for approval of any changes that happen. And so then what ends up happening is we have issues with sort of insurance certifications and things like that because we can't implement until it's approved. And there's a little bit of an efficiency issue that we'd like the state to consider in that regard.
Do we know how much is going into the general fund on this?
On which one? On number 9?
Yeah, this new one. I saw BJ's in the room, and so,
Do you know?
I'm thinking you came for this.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact amount. I know
But
it's.
do they put money into the general fund, or do they keep all of that money to service the functions that are not just the fire marshal, the state fire marshal, but communities that have mutual aid services?
Yeah, so it's an assessment on your homeowner's insurance premium that's labeled for the fire safety account. There's no standing appropriation for that, so every year you have to go request the appropriation for that. And currently there is money going into the general fund, but the agreement is that would not continue to the next biennium, but there's no guarantee. That's only a verbal commitment. There's nothing written about that, so.
That's why this piece then is to make sure that no more money go into the general fund.
What? Government is moving things from one fund to another?
We can get you
Possibly.
I can get you the exact.
Thank you. It'd be nice to know because I wasn't aware of this. It is unfortunately very common for the state to appropriate money from one pot to the next, depending on its needs. But this one is, a specific fee paid on insurance that should go to strictly fire safety and not thrown into the general fund to be redirected to others.
That's what it says. And therefore, if they're not using it, that they should refund it or reduce the cost to the homeowner.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'll move on to 11 then, which is the primary service area, the PSAs. Periodically, there are recommendations to change that. We've moved it from the monitoring statements up to the supporting statements. And so we also added a sentence in there about streamlining EMS regulations as well, including data collection. And so just wanting to continue to be engaged in, as you all know, we've got 2 PSAs in the city of Burnsville, primary service areas, and so we want to make sure that we stay on top of that because it impacts the services that we deliver. The next one is reimbursement for emergency medical services. That was moved from the monitoring. I think now that healthcare reform or all the healthcare changes are into effect, we want to make sure that we are understanding fully what those are and making sure that we are being reimbursed as appropriate. Have added some language there on requiring Medicare to maintain a reimbursement model. To make sure that we're not rationing care. That's not the intent, and so we want to make sure that whatever model for reimbursement also reflects that. Questions on that new language? All right, number 13, broadband priorities. We continue to support broadband. As you know, we're working with Dakota County on their broadband survey for the county, and this hasn't changed from last year's. 14, fiscal disparities. The legislature did look at the study, and so we want to continue to have them look at that, and we don't. The city has had a long-standing position that we don't want the legislature to reallocate fiscal disparities money to fund other activities, as was done last session. So, local government aid. There was a kind of a tweak in the law this year where they underfunded the funding of the VOS database. We've long had and the collection of that data, so they've underfunded the Department of Revenue. We've had a long-standing position in the city of Burnsville to support that database and having that data, and so this just tweaks that to say, you need to fund this. This is an important piece of information, and you need to fund it on an ongoing basis, so you all can use it for decisions. So, any questions on any of the supporting ones before I move into the monitoring or tracking statements? Some of these have moved around, and it's because what we try to do is group them a little bit by topic area. As far as monitoring, the numbers don't really mean anything other than because we're just monitoring. So these I will buzz through. The state property taxes. This is opposing the extension of state levied property taxes to other classes of property. It's been a long-standing position. Here are the 2 transportation pieces related to maintenance standards for MnDOT and then street improvement districts. Those have not changed from last year. Number 3, where it says local land use controls, we should have stricken that. That was the one that moved up to supporting position, so I apologize. We'll strike that on the next version. Number 4, the effective delivery of local government services. What this is about is that there have been some proposals to not really talk about outcomes that they want local governments to do in the services that they provide, but how they should do it. One specific example of this is when there was legislation on the sprinkling and requiring residential sprinkling. There was also provision in there for us to prohibit the use of fire stops. If you can remember that we've had a really successful effort with our multi-housing. These are the things that go above the stove and drop down. I'm sure he's cringing over there. You can tell, but puts the fire out if you can have that. Well, there was a prohibition on those in one of the bills, and it's been such an effective tool for us. We thought it didn't pass, which is good, but this is one of those too that we think is important, just from a policy level, that you wouldn't want the state to tell us how to do something. Tell us the outcomes. But,
are you kidding me?
So, so we have that in there if everyone's comfortable with that addition. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, good Lord. If they want to do it, then come do it.
All kinds of wild and crazy things going on the last few years up there.
So the next grouping of items are all things that have been in here before. Reseller legislation. The next 2 are kind of our public safety ones. Is to make sure that the reseller customer data is available for public safety operations. The photocop piece is allowing. This is not an issue for us. We don't have any cameras, but
it helps. It's technology if we need.
Yep. That has been there. So the next one, number 6, the Medicare reimbursement, that is stricken because it was moved to supporting statements. The para statement, the next 2 are really HR type issues. The para that we support cost sharing between employees and cities. However, we're concerned about the ever-increasing costs. The next one is the PALRA arbitrations. What we did is try to make this a little bit more generic because there have been some changes in PALRA, but we wanted to do this. We thought it was more consistent to leave it a little bit more generic, but also talk about really what this position has been about is the city's ability to manage its workforce in a cost-effective manner. And so that's what we have added in there in terms of generic to kind of capture the policy message that I think was really encapsulated in these other pieces. Are folks comfortable with those changes?
Yes.
Okay, and then the next two are kind of zoning type issues. The private well drilling has been a longstanding position, as well as the aggregate mining fee, which is number 10. And so I won't say much about those other than that those are, we continue to have those sort of public works / zoning pieces on there.
Okay.
With that, I stand for any questions with the
No,
rapid
I
fire
think
version of
it's-
our legislative agenda.
I think it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the right order now.
It's in the, yeah. And the thing is, we just added some, shifted some, but it's still, we're focusing on what we need to work on.
Everyone's
Okay.
comfortable with that. And
Yep.
so as we did last year, we'll put together some public pieces for the top 5 that you all can use when talking about
Yeah.
them as well. So we will get to that.
And then we'll after the election, and we'll invite the legislators to come and
Yeah.
have a conversation
That's the
with
next
us.
step. We'll bring this for your, with the changes we discussed tonight, we'll bring this back to you for your adoption. You might notice it was a little bit earlier than in past years.
No,
We
but
usually
it's-
do it in
yeah.
the October,
It's
but we
good.
thought it would be,
It's good.
we could better prepare for the session
absolutely.
that we have in December
Yeah.
usually. So,
Okay.
all right,
good.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item is community builders, and Council, you saw all of that Michelle's going to present, but I just wanted you to know that there was a letter that came from Dave Porter and Dick Manley, and that was met back in May, but it's included that they have this person as their, they would like Jim Schmidt to be considered. So you've seen all of it. Michelle, you want to present but I just wanted to make sure that the council recognized that there was a letter that was sent, and it is for a community builders award.
Madam Mayor, may I request a bio break for 5 minutes?
Oh, okay, 5 minutes. We'll take a break and then we'll come back and reconvene. Okay, yes. And go to, yeah, just keep moving along.
And I'm out of Kleenex. You noticed I was out of Kleenex.
hear me. It's we're on the governance of the Met Council, so most of it
You want
is.
me to come?
Yeah.
You want me to come?
Yeah. They hear.
All I need is caffeine.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I hate to say, but notwithstanding all the noise that has been made by the counties and the cities, nothing has changed. They're boldly going forward with all full
Confirmation for
speed.
CLA
Oh, good.
site.
The Burnsville City Council work session, and the item that we're on is the community nominations for community builder. Michelle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Yes, this year we got 7 nominations. Now we do put out a press release encouraging people to submit their nominations towards the fall of the year every year, but we will take the nomination applications throughout the entire year and save them, and they don't have to be on the actual form. They can be in any format.
Yeah. And that's why
So we do have the one that's in a slightly different format. The others, many of them have been coming through our online submittals. So that's something new that we can do now as well. We've got 7 nominations this year. Ebenezer Ridges Campus, Eugene Grazzini, Chris and Paul Nurk, Vicki Roy, Jim Smith, Margot Swenson, and Tom Taylor, and those are just alphabetical. And if the council has reviewed it, and it's your pleasure to.
Yeah. What do you think of the nominations? You want to accept all of them, Bill?
I would move that
We
we accept all of them. They all have contributed in a different way and have done well, and
Yeah.
we all know, certainly just picking out a couple, Tom Taylor's done a wonderful job, and Jim Schmidt has done a wonderful job, and what he has done, I know him personally, from Rotary and otherwise, and Vicki Roy over the years has done a wonderful
Margot.
job, and Margot, so on, and so that would be my proposal.
Okay.
I agree. I really like this because I think it helps to put a spotlight on people who otherwise do lots of work and just seem to never get recognition. So
Yeah. Now, Ebenezer Ridges Campus, that's new.
Yeah.
In that category, and you all are okay with that? Because they've done a wonderful job in addressing a lot of issues with regard to it. Okay. With that, Michelle, I think we move forward with our community builders.
Thanks, Maureen.
Okay. Now we move on to roundtable. Dan, we'll start this way. I'm usually over at the left side, so I'll come with you.
Caught me off guard. No. Burnsville Foundation, Community Foundation meeting was today, and we took on a new member. His name is Dan from the Chameleon Theater. I didn't get his last name, but I think that's the second person that has been added to the board since I've been liaison from the council. There was a long discussion about the Rich Vanderlyn Memorial statue, which is under construction. Which, to clarify, it's in the spirit of Rich Vanderlyn. It's next to the field, but it doesn't necessarily. That doesn't mean that it has a plaque on it that says Richard Vanderlyn. It's more of a, metaphorically speaking, I suppose. They have raised a significant amount of money and actually are now rolling that into the next project, which is something in memory of Ken Slipka, but again, metaphorically speaking, it's a sculpture that they would like to put in Nicollet Commons Park. A member of our staff is present. Is it Deb? or is it Miss Dorshak?
Julie
Dorshak. Yeah. And I had inquired because I missed the last couple of meetings to get caught up on this Nicollet Commons Park sculpture, and I was told that the city, on behalf, Julie Dorshak on behalf of the city, had mentioned that this was a number one or a top unfunded project, that we wanted to put another sculpture in the park, and it's been on our list for a while as one of those goals that we had, but didn't have the funding lined up for it. And that
it's with that water.
Yeah, it's kind of like the other side of
close
whatever
to the Performing Arts Center.
Yes.
So Centrifuge,
and then at
closer
one
to
end,
Nicollet, and then the other one.
So the other end of the water fun park. It's hard to call that a water park, but the stream.
Well, the kids all call it.
Yeah, it's a water park. So they have officially, in their minds, taken on the responsibility of fundraising and funding, and going through the process of that particular sculpture to the tune of $120,000. So I wanted to have some conversations with staff about.
I think they need to. That's one of the reasons why that one.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, you had some discussions about memorials and parks, and had a draft policy, which we are going to be bringing back to you in October. And the intent of that policy is not to proliferate memorials in the parks, outside of a couple of different pieces. And so public art is outside of that policy at this point. You haven't acted officially on it, but that'll be before you soon. And so I think I would have to see some of the details of this.
Yeah.
And
I understand staff's been that she has talked with staff about the concept. I haven't seen a concept.
They haven't got to that point yet, but
Okay.
I'll clarify, because I inquired a lot to get all the details, so I was updated, because I wanted to be able to, number one, represent this to the council and to staff as a liaison in this setting for sure, and also understand what the goal was. So this public art is basically, metaphorically speaking, related
Spirit
to
of volunteering and service to the community is what I understand.
Exactly. And Ken Slipka's passing is what spurred it, but ultimately it is a piece of public art that will be going into the park, funded by the foundation, with the spirit of Ken Slipka behind it. It's not a memorial to him per se, with a branding of his name or a likeness or anything like that. So it appears that the group got a clear message from staff on what it needed to be to be able to
it needs
move
to be
forward.
public
So,
art and not
bingo. And they're using the same, I thought I put his name.
Wiley.
Foster.
Wiley.
Yeah.
Foster Wiley.
Foster is the artist, and they're working with him. They've begun working
He's the
with
one
him right now to start putting the conception in.
is the artist for Centrifuge.
Yes. So anyway, they're involved in the contract with Foster to then begin the process, and there was some questions.
Did the foundation adopt the concept and moving forward?
They did not. They were unable to do that today because the question came from the lawyer on the foundation board as to some specifics related to the contract with Foster, and so I recommended that he just got presented it tonight, so he has a chance to read it, number one, and Julie Dorshak was going to put him in contact with our city attorney and or the city attorney at the time when the other sculpture was put in. That was a long time ago, because of some questions related to how the contract is put together before the board acts on it. So hopefully over the next couple of weeks they'll do that, but fundraising is already well on its way, and they have. She's a dynamo when it comes to fundraising. Mary Jo has no concerns whatsoever for raising $120,000 to be able to complete this project. So it's huge. So it's great. Anyway, that was pretty much it for that. There was one other thing that I didn't write on notes, was on the agenda. Anyone familiar with smile.amazon.com?
No.
Anybody? I've never heard of it either, but it's been out for about a year or so. It's a method to collect donations for conducting normal activity on Amazon.com. I've never heard it advertised, so it's probably within the 501c3 circles, maybe, is the only place they really published it. When you go on smile.amazon.com, you're on Amazon, the same Amazon site, but it puts you in, I would assume it's through the shopping cart, 0.5% of all purchases made on Amazon through smile.amazon.com are donated to one specific charity that you designate at the front end. So when you log in and sign up through Smile, which you can use your normal Amazon, it asks you what charity do you want your 0.5% to go to. And so every purchase that made is sent to that charity quarterly, as long as it exceeds a minimum of $25. They don't cut a check for smaller than that. So this is great. And so the foundation has adopted it as they're setting up an account and being an official 501c3 entity that is registered with Amazon, so then everybody can choose to do that. The price is the same. You're basically shopping on Amazon like nothing else is different, except you're on smile.amazon.com, which triggers that 0.5% donation of your purchase.
So communication should go out, if we're going to purchase anything from Amazon, go to Smile.
Yes, and the board is going to request that that be added to the next publication of the Burnsville Bulletin, if we so are inclined to do so, to help the foundation.
Yeah, that's a nice way of raising money.
I thought it was a great idea, and I asked if eBay had this or any other major e-commerce sites like that, and eBay might. Nobody was aware of any, but this apparently has been around for at least a year, but not much longer than that, according to one of the board members who was somewhat familiar with it.
Okay.
So that was pretty cool. I have just a quick update from the last committee meeting on the transportation. I was unable to make it, so Steve came through like the champ that he always does and gave me some quick notes. The Met Council, ironically, after our discussion tonight, presented the transportation policy plan that we discussed tonight. He notes the plan is only plans for operations and maintenance dollars for existing highways, no expansion unless additional revenues are found. Expansion is focused on transit and pedestrian bike facilities. The orange line is in the plan for Burnsville. That I'm sure will play politically into our decision to withdraw from Livable at some way or shape or form if they can make it. He said they spent some time on regional solicitation, which is how federal funds are given to projects. New federal rules require that equity be a part of the selection process, meaning areas of racial poverty and the elderly should get preference. TAB will be recommending the format and scoring of the application and how equity is balanced in the evaluations. Right now, TAC, which Steve serves on, is at odds with the Met Council on this. TAC has recommended lower equity percentages than the Met Council wants for a roadway portion of the funding package. That, to me, that statement from Met Council is consistent with what you presented earlier, Jenny, on related to the housing and the transportation. The technical committee believes its role is as a technical advisor, and that that a mandated social score shouldn't determine the best roadway projects. The TAC recognizes we have social issues that need to be addressed. We just don't feel that road project funding is the right way to address it. The Met Council and TAB will most likely have some very interesting discussions on this topic. Met Council has made it clear unless they get what they want, they won't approve it. They are using somewhat of this threat of delaying federal funding for projects to get the outcomes they desire. The TAB meeting is this week, so it will we'll know whether it is going to be an issue or not. So it might be an interesting meeting to watch. And then finally, a new policy on water supply was adopted that emphasizes we need to work together to manage our water resources to ensure we have a sustainable supply. The policy also asks for the state agencies to look at the reuse of wastewater for irrigation. That's come up in that policy committee in prior years. The last thing, I apologize. There was some discussion on whether reference to removal of the Dan Patch gag order should remain in the policy on transit. St. Louis Park wanted it stricken. Shakopee and Prior Lake spoke out strongly against it being stricken. Ultimately, with the exception of St. Louis Park, the committee recommended leaving it in. St. Louis Park is concerned about adding more trains in their city along this alignment. Scott County cities think it needs to be evaluated for all modes of transportation. Steve Elkins, who does serve on the Met Council, agreed the gag order should be removed. Very good notes. Thank you very much, Steve. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Okay. Suzanne?
The AIM Center Commission will meet on September 24th, so I'll have something next time for that. They're meeting just quarterly now, so there are no updates at this time for that. Steve Albrecht also attended the LMC Improving Service Delivery meeting for me, and I have notes here, and he states that this meeting was dedicated to presentations. One was on the groundwater issues, and it was a presentation related to the current studies being done by the Met Council on potential for groundwater shortages, which only reaffirms our smart decision, and Savage to start utilizing the surface water to supplement our supplies. So we're doing good there. There were a couple other presentations. One I thought that was one to note was on the emerald ash borer. And they're seeing a slower spread in Minnesota due to potentially to the cold winters, which is good news. Although they touched on more invasive species coming our way in the future, so I don't know what those are. He didn't say, but at least that's some good news. So that's about it for that.
Bill?
Nothing significant for mine unless Dana or Heather have something to add.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mary?
I would say the same, except I did have something from the I-35 board, and that is our very own Ryan Peterson is leading an effort that the I-35 Solutions Group share lobbying with another group, such as the 494 Coalition, to create a bigger voice, and I think that everybody there seemed to think that was a good idea. It certainly would be more efficient. There will be a legislative update that they will be sponsoring, and that will be in October 8th in Burnsville. We also heard a presentation on I-35 494 interchange improvement from MnDOT. It was very interesting, but the bottom line is there's no money, so it just remains interesting. That's all I have.
Okay. For me, the Municipal Legislative Commission, we meet on a quarterly basis, and the only thing that we're working on now is the website, and our strategy for moving forward. Heather, do you have anything else from MLC? I think that's the only thing that we focused on this last time. The Regional Council of Mayors, we had a presentation from the university. It's a new group that looks at transit and transportation. They're really quite new, and so they presented to us, but their focus was really on transit corridors around the metropolitan area. And we all know about the corridors in the metropolitan area, and the green line and the red line. So they're working on metrics so that we have a better understanding. On the Metro Cities policy, tomorrow is our last meeting. Dana and I are on the governance part of the Met Council, and you've heard everything that has to do with trying to keep the Met Council on their legislative directive and not try to creep into everything else. Anything else? No. So it's really trying to hold them accountable. And then our Convention and Visitors Bureau, we didn't meet last time because everybody was on vacation. And I think the only ones that would have been there was Jenny and me and Sarah. And so it was canceled until this coming month. So that's all that we have. But we're working on the budget so that we would be ready to bring the budget to the City Council. But things are going well with regard to the reports from our hospitality product. So on an uptick. And that's it. Heather and Dana, anything else from staff? Michelle? Okay, no. And then, council, if there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.